Hello and welcome to ProutNews. Each week, we look at stories from around the world, not only to understand what happened, but to consider what those events tell us about the way our economies and societies are organized. This week, we're asking a somewhat unusual economic question. Who is the economy supposed to benefit? Normally, the answer is human beings. We judge economic success by employment, income, production, consumption, and improvements in human living standards. But human beings share this planet with millions of other species. What would happen if we designed economic activity not simply to reduce the harm we cause to other living beings, but actually to improve their conditions as well? Our three stories take us to Finland, Botswana, and Britain. They show three very different relationships between economic activity, human well-being, and the other forms of life with which we share the planet. Our first story comes from Kouvola, Finland, where researchers, farmers, businesses, and other specialists gathered on the 11th and 12th of August to discuss a very different approach to farming peatlands. The central idea is called paludiculture. For generations, peatlands through Europe have been drained so they can't be used for conventional agriculture, forestry, or peat extraction. But when peatlands are drained, the entire ecosystem changes. Wetland plants disappear, habitat for insects, birds, and other animals is lost. The peat itself begins to decompose, releasing stored carbon. Paludiculture asks a fundamentally different question. Instead of changing the wetland so conventional agriculture can take place, why not change agriculture so that production can take place within a functioning wetland? The Finland workshop focused particularly on niche crops that can grow on wet or re-wetted peatlands. These include wild berries, herbs, bog myrtle, sundew, aromatic plants, medicinal plants, and plants that can be used to produce natural dyes. Participants discussed how these crops could be cultivated, processed into products, and eventually developed into viable commercial value chains. They also visited the Suo-like experimental site near Kouvola, established on re-wetted land that had previously been used for peat harvesting. Researchers there are experimenting with approximately 20 to 30 different crops to determine which plants can be commercially productive under wet conditions. Participants also visited Valkmusa National Park, where they could observe the biodiversity of a natural Finnish peatland and compare that living ecosystem with landscapes altered by drainage. The economic idea behind all of this is important. Farmers still need livelihoods. Communities still need productive lands. People still need food, medicines, materials, and other useful products. But instead of obtaining those benefits by destroying the conditions needed by other species, paludiculture attempts to create economic value while restoring those conditions. A re-wetted peatland can once again support wetland vegetation, insects, birds, and other organisms. At the same time, humans can potentially derive income from crops specifically adapted to that environment. The economy therefore doesn't simply become less destructive, economic production becomes connected to the restoration of a living ecosystem. Our second story takes us to northern Botswana. The story begins with a serious conflict between people and wildlife around Botswana's famous Okavango Delta. Local families depend on cattle for their livelihoods, but lions also live in the region. When cattle were largely left unattended while grazing, lions sometimes killed them. For a farmer with relatively few animals, losing cattle can mean losing a significant portion of the family's wealth. So, farmers retaliated by shooting or poisoning lions. By the end of 2013, according to Mongabay, approximately 30 lions, more than half of the northern Okavango population, have been killed in a single year. The organization CLAWS, Communities Living Among Wildlife Sustainably, began looking for another solution. Instead of simply telling farmers that they should stop killing lions, CLAWS addressed the economic reason the lions were being killed. Farmers needed to protect their cattle. One solution was surprisingly traditional: better herding. CLAWS helped communities organize cattle into communal herds supervised by trained herders. The cattle are watched more carefully during the day and placed at night inside mobile predator-resistant enclosures known as bomas. Herders also learn rotational grazing, basic veterinary care, and rangeland management. At the same time, lions are fitted with GPS collars. When a lion approaches livestock or a settlement, local people can receive an alert and move their cattle before an attack occurs. The results reported by Mongabay are remarkable. Across 3 villages participating fully in the herding program, only about 10 cattle have been lost over roughly 5 years, compared with dozens or sometimes hundreds lost previously. And fewer lions are being killed. Cub survival increased from roughly 1/3 between 2014 to 2017 to about 70%, while the northern Okavango lion population has increased approximately 50% over the past 4 years. The program is now trying to make economic relationship even stronger. Participating farmers begun selling certified wildlife-friendly beef. To qualify, cattle must be raised using practices that reduce overgrazing, while participating herders pledge not to kill lions. According to Mongabay, the beef has sold for about a 10% premium over typical rural market prices. Better herding can also improve the rangeland itself. And if these practices expand, Botswana may eventually be able to remove portions of veterinary fencing that have blocked ancient migration routes used by wildebeest, zebra, giraffes, elephants, and other wildlife. So look at what is happening here. Farmers benefit because they lose fewer cattle and receive better prices. Cattle benefit because they receive better protection and veterinary care. Lions benefit because fewer are poisoned or shot. And the wider ecosystem may benefit if wildlife corridors can eventually reopen. Instead of deciding that either cattle farmers or lions must lose, the economic system is being redesigned so that their interests can coexist. Our final story shows the opposite side of the issue. The British newspaper The Guardian published a letter titled "As Heatwaves Hit Britain, Spare a Thought for Farm Animals," written by Claire Bass, the Senior Director of Campaigns and Public Affairs at Humane World for Animals UK. Bass argues that Britain's preparations for increasingly severe heatwaves have largely overlooked one particularly vulnerable population: farm animals. Pigs and poultry are especially susceptible to extreme heat because their ability to regulate their own body temperature is limited. According to Bass, temperatures above roughly 27 degrees Celsius or about 81 degrees Fahrenheit can create serious welfare problems, while ventilation and cooling systems on farms can struggle during prolonged periods of extreme heat. What makes the article particularly relevant to our discussion is the way Bass says that animals are often discussed. Britain legally recognizes animals as sentient beings. They experience pain, fear, and distress. Yet, when extreme heat kills farm animals, public discussion frequently focuses on mortality rates, production losses, and economic costs. In other words, the animals matter economically because they produce something humans want. But Bass is asking whether an economy should recognize something more. If an animal can suffer, should its welfare matter independently of the financial loss created when that animal becomes sick or dies? That distinction takes us directly to the larger issue behind this week's ProutNews. Our 3 stories present very different ways of thinking about economic activity. In Finland, researchers and farmers are asking whether damaged peatlands can be restored while still producing useful crops and livelihoods. In Botswana, cattle farmers are changing how they manage their herds so that farmers can prosper while cattle are better protected, lions recover, and wildlife habitat improves. And in Britain, the treatment of farm animals during extreme heat raises a different question. Are other living beings valuable only because of what they provide to humans? Prout and neo-humanism makes an important distinction between what they describe as utility value and existential value. A tree has utility value because it can provide timber, fruit, medicine, shade, or other resources. A wetland has utility value because it can store water, support fisheries, or protect communities from floods. But living beings also possess existential value. Their right to exist does not depend entirely upon whether human beings find a profitable use for them. That doesn't mean human beings should stop using natural resources. The challenge is to organize that activity in ways that allows human beings and the rest of the living world to develop together. production can sometimes be redesigned so that restoring ecosystems and protecting other species actually strengthens human livelihoods. Perhaps that should become one of the measures of genuine economic progress. Not simply how much did we produce or how much did human income increase, but also did the way we produce that wealth leave the other living beings sharing our world better off or worse? An economy capable of answering that question may bring us closer to prosperity not simply for human beings, but for all life. Thank you for joining us for another edition of ProutNews. I'm Ralph Andrews. We'll see you next week.